Welcome, guys, to the inaugural episode of Take Five. That's Connor Young. I'm Tyler Hill. And today we're going to be breaking down the top group of five football teams going into 2024 2025. It's an exciting year. A lot of change throughout some of the top teams that we've seen be at the top for the past couple of years. When you look at your Tulanes, UTSAs, teams like that are vying for that G5 playoff spot now. There's a lot of differences. And Connor, I'm glad you get to join me and talk about it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Like you said, huge shakeup around G5. We see a couple G5 powerhouses of old kind of go back up the board and maybe take that top spot again. And then there'll be some other teams that were good last year that we expect to be decent as well in 2024, 2025. We're going to talk about all of it in just a little bit. We have a good show for you guys today.
Yeah, really excited. We'll break down, we have top fives each, so we'll give you, the top five G5 teams that we think in all of college football. Going to hit on some honorable mentions, some teams that are rated highly in some predictive metrics that we're not as high on for a couple of different reasons. But first and foremost, before we get into any of that, we're going to have questions of the day for every podcast. And the first one with the NBA Finals are here. The Mavs are down 2-0, Connor. You're a Boston guy. You got the Red Sox hat on. Are the Mavs done? Is it the Celtics title already?
Yeah, I mean, I'm feeling good as a Boston guy right now, but I don't think the Mavs are done at all. I think this game's going, or the series rather, is going the distance. I thought that coming into things, I know 2-0. Wow. Yeah, I know the 2-0 advantage for the Celtics so far early maybe makes that seem a little bit unlikely, but I think the Mavs are a really good team. I think they just got to get out of Boston. Luka is the best player on the court every single game. Yes. Kyrie's been a great number two for that team, and they've really retooled to the deadline. They got two new starters at the deadline, and they've looked like they're continuing to gel throughout the season. I think that they're a really scary team. I honestly, coming into this, could have seen things going either way. I did think the Celtics would win by just a little bit, but I still think it's going to be a really good series, although it has been a little bit of a wash to start, which I'm all right with.
Yeah, just not a lot going for the Mavs outside of Luka, right? He is playing very well, over 30 in both games, and then the role players and even Kyrie just have not helped him out a ton. I think this is a really bad matchup. Going in, I have Boston in 6, and I feel pretty good about that. I think there can be one game where Luka just goes even more nuts than he has been, right, and just carries the team. A game where Kyrie doesn't have 16 points, instead he goes for 30 or something like that. Maybe a game where the role players hit threes to get those 2 wins. But, man, it just looks like a really bad matchup for Dallas. And Boston's just playing really good. They got Porzingis back. Jaylen Brown's playing really good. The only thing you really look at is that Tatum's not playing great. But they haven't needed him. I mean, Drew Holiday might win the Finals MVP, right? They're so deep, and they can hit you from so many different areas, both offensively and defensively. They've been the best team in the league, it seems like, the whole year, and they're showing it now.
Yeah, I don't know if I've just watched too much Boston Celtics basketball over the last couple of seasons. Had my heart broken a couple too many times. But you hit on it. Jason Tatum, their best player, hasn't been playing well, and that's not shocking to me. He just hasn't shown up in big games throughout his career as much as you would like. And that kind of scares me when you talk about put-away games against a guy like Luka, who loves the spotlight and seems to always elevate his game. So I don't know. I think they're going to be a tough team to put away. I really do. But I do think the Celtics have put themselves in a great position to do that with that 2-0 lead. I think they'll get to it eventually, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're playing basketball for a little bit while longer.
No, you're right. It's always tough. When you have Luka on the other side, right, it's tough to feel comfortable as a team. Yeah. So we both got the Celtics winning here, and then now we can get into college football, which is coming in a couple months here.
Yeah.
It's talking season, right? There's not much going on. Even recruiting classes are done. Transfer portal is closed, so it is full on preview season. So Bill Connolly of ESPN has a metric. It's a predictive metric called SP+. So it takes things like your recruiting, your transfer portal from the past 4 years to give a roster, like an idea of your roster, and then success from past years, returning production, right? And smashes it all into a metric that gives a power ranking. So when we're talking about power rankings, that is not, hey, if Liberty is 41 and UTSA is 53, that doesn't necessarily mean that Liberty will have a better record depending on the schedule. It's just, hey, if these two teams were to play on a neutral field with everything being equal, Liberty would be predicted to win by X amount of points, right? It's really, it's derived from gambling, right? It's to say, hey, if you strip out all context of what the game's going to be, these are just the better teams. So when we take a look at that, Bill Connolly starts it off with Boise State at number 38 is the number 1 team in the group of 5, followed up just one spot down by Memphis at number 39 out of the American Athletic Conference. Liberty, as we talked about, number 41, Conference USA, after their great year undefeated and being the G5 selected for the New Year's Six Bowl. App State coming in then at 51 from the Sun Belt, the first representative out of the Sun Belt. UTSA at 53rd out of the American. And then we have some next teams. So that's the top 5. And then kind of miscellaneous down the line. You have Troy at 54, Louisiana at 56, Fresno State at 57, JMU at 58, Miami, Ohio at 62, Tulane at 65. And then even down to a couple of teams we will talk about in Texas State at number 80 and USF at number 76. So once you get into that area, you're pretty much done with a lot of the Power 4 teams except your Vanderbilts, your South Carolinas, some of the lesser teams. So it gets a little more G5 heavy in those late 40s, early 50s. But that's just kind of an idea of some of the top teams that are predicted going into this year. So we'll start off, Connor. That is his top teams. Were there any that you looked at and just said, I really don't see it. I don't know if they're going to be that level going into this year?
Yeah. Troy, I don't know if he has it as a top team, but I would have him a little bit lower than he did. There's a couple teams that I was a little bit more favorable to than he was. Texas State, as in one of them. I know we both had USF higher on our list. That's a little bit of a preview. You a little bit higher than I, but that's a team that I was surprised was as low. But for the most part, I think it's a pretty good list. As you talked about, it's talking season at this point when it comes to college football, and there's a lot of talk around the Power 4 teams, not as much around the G5, around the college football sphere, you could say. So that's what we're going to be focusing on all leading up to the season, into the season, Take 5, Group of 5. That's what we're here to talk about, 365 all year round. So I'm excited to be able to kind of dig in deeper into this than what I've seen around the community a little bit. But yeah, I think it's a good list. It's kind of hard to make this stuff up. You're just looking at transfer lists, which on paper can look really good, but on the field, it can look a whole lot different. So, in 2-3 months' time, this list could be shoveled all around the board. But I think it's a good starting point, and I agree with a lot of the decisions, maybe a little bit different in some of the minute seedings of the teams, but we'll get into that in just a moment.
I know for me, you mentioned Troy. That's where I look at first. Troy lost their coach, John Summerall, who went 23-4 these past 2 years. Really, really good coach, especially on that defensive side of the ball. And they're coming in at 129th in the nation in returning production, only returning 35%. And that's counting transfers, where if you get a transfer from another school, their production counts towards yours. So that's not just, hey, we're losing these guys, but we brought in a bunch of transfers to replace it. No, they're just losing a lot. Kamani Vidal was drafted in the 6th round. He was the 2nd leading rusher in the nation last year. Gunnar Stockton threw for 3,700 yards and is gone, right? There's just so much new when it comes to Troy. And they're in a conference in the Sun Belt that I think is one of, if not the best conference in the G5. And so for me, when I look at Troy and they're number 6 on his list, I really just disagree. I would drop them below teams like Louisiana, Fresno State, JMU even, and then Texas State and USF. That's a team that, with so much new, and then Gerard Parker is the new head coach they hired, who was an offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, right? So you look at even a lack of a little bit of head coaching experience, and you go from a guy, hey, 23-4, this is a top G5 coach. And then you go to a guy who now has no coaching experience, right? Or very little head coaching experience. And that's a tough sell for me to start and have them that high in the list. So just when I'm looking at that, 54 is a little rich for me, and 6 in the G5 is also just a little rich.
Yeah, for Troy, there's a lot of unknowns, and really all that we know is that they lost a lot, right? Like, we don't really know a whole lot about the talent they're bringing in. The head coach is always a big thing in college football, like you talked about. When you see someone who's had success leave, that's a little scary. So they've all got a lot of proof coming into this season, and it'll be interesting to see what this kind of retool looks like at Troy, but it is going to be difficult because, like you said, their conference, that's one that I'm looking at in the G5. I think we're going to be talking a lot about all season long. There's a lot of good, sneaky good teams littered throughout that conference.
Yeah, Sun Belt is one of my favorite conferences as well, just because of the regionality of it, right? It feels like that throwback conference where, hey, the Southeastern Conference is just Southeastern teams, right? The Sun Belt Conference is just teams in that Sun Belt. And so I know I love it. Can't wait to continue to talk about it. And, apart from it just being a fun conference, it's got a lot of talent in it. A lot of really historic programs that are able to put up good numbers year in and year out. So, we go from Bill Connolly's list and some of the disagreements we have. We're going to give you our list. So we're going to give you top 5 and top 5 each. But Connor, to start, do you have any honorable mentions that were just on the outside looking in from being that 5th team or that 4th team?
Yeah. I don't know if I'd say this team was super close to my top 5, but it's a team I like a lot and do want to give a shout out to. And that's Texas State. They got Jordan McLeod, James Madison's star quarterback from last year. And they've got a chance to really compete for the Sun Belt title this year, which, like we just talked about, the Sun Belt, a really competitive, fun conference. I think they could be a fun team. I hope they're a good team, and I hope they're worth kind of putting in that 5, 6, 7 conversation by, I don't know, halfway through the season, a quarter way through. So I think it's definitely a team to watch. I'll say that. Another team that maybe I have a little bit more seriously up closer to the top 5 is UTSA. That's a team that I think you could easily slot into your top 5 and get away with it. They did lose their quarterback, Frank Harris, but I think they'll be okay. They've got a lot of good players coming in. One of the best recruiting classes for G5 schools for transfers as well, which is interesting. And we talked about that a little bit before the podcast, Tyler. But UTSA, they got a lot of firepower, and it's just going to be coming down to putting those pieces together, making sure they fit, just finding the complete puzzle. And if they do that, it could be a scary team that we could easily be putting in that conversation for the best G5 team by the end of the year.
Yeah, UTSA, when you look at them, they lost a lot, which that seems to be a theme for G5 teams, right? Is that you lose Frank Harris, who was there for 6 years, and I would say was probably the best or second best quarterback in the G5 last year, somewhere in that top 5 for sure. And then you lose Trey Moore, who transfers to Texas. That's 14 sacks and 17 and a half tackles for loss, just gone, right? That's really hard to replace a guy that's twitchy and that good off the edge. And that's a big thing for their defense, right? They're second in the FBS in sacks. So they love to get after quarterback. And when you lose a pass rusher like that, it just makes it harder. But I think they're the team that is the best poised to replace that. You talked about their transfer portal class and they're recruiting Jeff Traylor, is a Texas high school legend, right? And so he's able to replace that with guys that bounce back down. Denver Harris and Kendrick Blackshire were both really, really high-rated high school recruits out of Texas, didn't work out at their programs respectively, and they bounced down, right? And so that's what you can get as the G5 is, hey, the Power 4 is going to probably take our best or second best player, but can we retool these guys that, for maturity reasons with Denver Harris, and then for just, Alabama's tough to get on the field with for Kendrick Blackshire. Can we mold them into something that we had in Trey Moore or in different corners in the past? So I think they're one that I would love to watch. I had them in my top 10 as well. And then Texas State, man, you said it. Do we think they're actually going to be like a solidly good team? Because they'll put up points, but I don't know if I trust them as a full team.
Yeah, that's the problem. They're that flashy team. There's always a couple of them every season where it's like, hey, they're fun. We'll see if they can win football games. I think they'll be good. I think they'll be decent. I don't think they're going to have a bad season. Do I think they'll be fighting for the top G5 spot by the end of the season, or really even a conference championship or conference championship bid? Probably not. But that's just because that conference is stacked and they have to play really good football teams almost every other week throughout the season. But I think it's a good step in the right direction and an exciting one for that school and its fans.
Yeah, just hadn't had a ton of success after being an FCS power for a while. And, 8-5 last year, that's nothing to sneeze at, especially like you said in the Sun Belt. It's just funny because they put up 77 points on somebody in the season and they beat Baylor in the first game of the season, right? That's crazy. Yeah. Crazy highs. And then they give up 77 points to Arkansas State. That's the kind of wild swings we're talking about when you run, as explosive as an offense. But it also, if you are moving that fast and you just go 3 and out or you're throwing picks, it strains your defense so much and can lead to some, you're going to win games you probably shouldn't because you can just blitz teams. And then you're probably going to lose to teams that you shouldn't because of just the wild swings.
Yeah, definitely. I'm right there with you on them.
Yeah, and then the last one that I wanted to mention, they're actually really different than Texas State, is Louisiana. And so Louisiana is kind of they went through a transition. So Billy Napier, who's now coach at Florida, right, was at Louisiana. They went 13-1 in his last year. They finished number 16 in the nation, and then he goes off to Gainesville. They bring in Michael Desormeaux, and ULL has had 2 6-7 seasons, and so the drop off is pretty substantial. And I want to hit on them because I think it feels like a make or break year for them, right? Desormeaux was on that Napier staff and was with him. And so when you see those high highs and Louisiana can accomplish that, I think the fan base and the athletic department is going to say, hey, 6-7 is just not good enough. And so they're going to need to take a step this season.
Yeah, I'm glad you hit on them. They weren't a team that I really had in my top 10, but you're right. I mean, apart from this program, in general, when there's pressure like that, it either makes or breaks you, right? Like when you're kind of got the fan base down your neck saying, we got to see some production here, then it's either come out and play good football games on Saturday, or you might crack under that pressure and you're going to see changes. So it's a big year for that head coaching regime and the team as a whole. That is, okay, are we going to move forward with this core, this plan, this staff, or are we going to hit the reset button? That's what this season I think is probably going to tell us. I can't see them having another middling season and just kind of coasting and leaving the team as is.
Yeah, totally agree. They are passionate about their football down there in Louisiana, right? And again, when you see them can achieve at that high level, it changes expectations in a huge way. So now we'll get to our actual top 5 list here. That was just some honorable mentions that we hit on as teams that weren't quite in the top 5, but will be very, very good. And we can easily see them bouncing into that top 5. So I'll start out with my 5th team. So this is where, as we hinted before, I had USF. I wrote down in my notes, this is purely a bet on Byron Brown, their quarterback, and Alex Golesh, their head coach, which seems short-sighted. But when you look at the G5 and teams that are historically successful, a lot of times having a really, really good dual threat quarterback and then a really, really good coach with a great scheme that is tough to defend, that's usually enough to make you competitive in the G5.
Yeah, I have them as my 5th team. And you look at what they've been doing over the season under Golesh. In 2022, they went 1-11, and then Golesh comes in and they have a much better 7-6 season the next year. So they've been improving, and they have the pieces, kind of like what we talked about with Texas State, where they have some fun, flashy guys that you can get really creative with, and you know that you're going to see some outlandish, classic G5 running gun football from. And a lot of the time, you're going to find some success with that at the G5 level, even in college football in general, but especially against a lot of G5 defenses. For South Florida, it's just going to come down to, can they batten down the hatches and make sure that they're not putting up 77 one game, giving up 77 the next, like Texas State. And I think that they have a much better chance of doing that than Texas State. That's why I have them at 5, and I had Texas State more near the 10 part of my list. But I think they're a fun team, a good team with a high potential.
Yeah, they're coming off of a season with a lot of momentum, right? People forget they were in that game with Alabama in week 3 last year. For the entirety of the game. Now, part of that was because Alabama was starting a different quarterback and, all of the issues that they had at the beginning of the season last year. But that's still not nothing. For Golesh to, like you said, take a 1-11 team and to be able to do that, to make a bowl game in which they crushed Syracuse. Now, was that a Syracuse team that was running a tight-ended Wildcat? Maybe. Right, so maybe that's not as good a win as you would see on paper. That was a horrific game to watch. There's no need to watch the highlights. There weren't that many. But that's still a huge momentum win, right? Is, hey, in our first year, we're not only going to a bowl game, we're going to win it. And I just love how that system fits a lot of the talent that you have locally. So I'm down here in the Tampa area. I'm in Mayaca City, close to Sarasota, for those of you who don't know. And there's just so much skill talent here. There's so much that is really, really good, but, is not going to the Floridas, the Florida States, the Miamis, right? And so they're left over as still really, really good players who can help you out in big ways.
Sure.
And it's mostly in that skill position group, right? Your wide receivers, your running backs, your DBs, stuff that Florida is known for in the high school ranks. And they're taking advantage of that by running an offense that, dude, if you're a wide receiver, why would you not want to be in this offense? If you're a quarterback, why would you not want to be in this offense? It's so fun. So I think the match of coach and scheme to area is something that will just propel USF forward even more.
Yeah, I'm with you. And even apart from this season, creating a culture and a reputation around that as a program, which UCF already has done, but they're going to continue to do, USF, excuse me, that's huge. To, like you said, to continue to bring in that talent, especially when you're in a hotbed of talent like that in the Florida area, like you talked about. So not only could I see USF having one of their best seasons this year, I could see them really being a staple in the G5 over the next 3 years, especially if their head coach sticks around, because it seems like he's got stuff figured out around there after his first season was pretty successful, and we're expecting him to take another jump forward here in year 2.
Yeah, and there's no reason USF should not be that type of program, just being in the state of Florida. And when you go back in their history, it's not out of the realm of possibility for them to be that level of program. In the early 2000s, dude, they were number 2 in the country at one point, right? And they've had that success before and then just went through a big dry period, right? And so now I think they can definitely get back to it. Moving on to number 4. So now we'll start with you, Connor. Who did you have as your number 4 team?
Yeah. So for me at number 4, I had App State. For App State, it's just kind of run it back. There's been a lot of movement around the Sun Belt. A lot of teams losing their coaches, a lot of teams losing their quarterbacks, looking at JMU, a lot of teams kind of shuffling the deck, as it were, either in hopes of getting better or just because, it's G5. You're going to lose players, you're going to lose coaches, either looking to go up the ladder or just moving across laterally. But for App State, they've returned a lot of that core that played for the Sun Belt title. And in a conference that is very good, as we've continued to hit on throughout this podcast already. But there's a lot of new faces and new places. I like to see that core kind of run it back, return, hopefully take a step up. They are going to be under Sean Clark, once again, the head coach for the 5th straight year. So there's some consistency there in a guy that's had success in that program and looks to keep moving the ball forward, because they are a program that I think has continually gotten better and better and better. Even had some big moments where they made headlines nationally over the last couple of seasons. So for App State, where I said for USF, I feel like they're kind of a high ceiling, low floor team. For App State, I think it's a really high floor, maybe not the highest ceiling, but I do think they're a very safe bet to be a good competitive team from week 1 all the way to the end of the season.
Totally agree. I think this team, the perfect way to describe them is high floor, right? App State as a program has been very high floor ever since they've been in FBS. They, you think back to them beating Michigan in the Big House, and since then they've just been shooting up, basically. Now, Sean Clark had some, subpar years by the standard, but got back to it that last year. The biggest thing for them is Joey Aguilar, man. He broke out in a huge way. He actually wasn't even the starter to start the year last year, with Ryan Berger being named the starter coming out of fall camp, who is now at Liberty, which, dude, that's just how the transfer portal works, right?
Yep.
But, Aguilar was amazing last year, threw for over 4,000 yards, 33 touchdowns, which is the second most of returning quarterbacks against only 10 picks. Now, I will say he's a gunslinger, right? And so he will put the ball in harm's way, but he'll also, again, as you can see with that 33 touchdowns, he'll go out and make some plays. So he's a guy who you can really count on in a conference that we said at the top has a lot of change. Him staying and being back for another year is huge for App State.
Yeah, I'm excited to see App State. Like I said, we think we know what we're going to get from them, but it's college football, it's G5 football. You never really know. But like I said, with the low floor, the high floor, you really can't see them having a catastrophic, the wheels fall off season where maybe there's a little bit of a twinge of that with USF where you're like, okay, are they going to kind of revert back to what we've seen in years prior? For App State, I don't think you have those worries. You just really want to see if they can consistently keep up with a lot of teams that have shuffled the deck in the Sun Belt, but maybe those teams got significantly better, where App State maybe didn't take that giant leap forward. So can they kind of close that gap? That's the question.
Yeah, I think when you look at their schedule, right, you can chalk at Clemson up as a loss. I feel pretty confident about that. But when you look at everything else, Liberty is going to be a very tough game, but it's at home, right? And so you get them coming to Kidd Brewer Stadium. I think we're going to do at some point a podcast about the top matchups and games we're looking forward to, that one is huge for me. That might end up being number one.
It is.
Just seeing those top two teams clash. But other than that, I think every single game on this schedule, you will be more talented than the other team. So now you just got to be able to take care of business, right? So you chalk up at Clemson, and then Liberty, I do think, is a coin toss game. And if you take care of business in the rest of your schedule, I mean, at worst 10-2, or probably at worst 9-3 if they drop another one of those coin flips. But man, we talk about high floor. I don't see them dropping below that. And then if you win the Sun Belt, I think you have a pretty good case to be the G5 representative when you come out of a good conference like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you. I'm excited for that Liberty game.
Moving on to... Yeah, that one, again, we're both former Liberty students, now Liberty grads, weird to say. But that's going to be, one team is going to come out of that game ecstatic and be probably in the driver's seat for the college football playoff berth. And the other one is going to have an uphill battle. Number 4 for me is Boise State. So
wow,
they just had a really weird year last year. So their coach, Andy Avalos, got fired in November, right? They started 5-5. They were predicted to be very, very good going into last year. And it just didn't come to fruition. Taylon Green didn't have as good a year at quarterback. And just, a bunch of weird stuff happens. Defensive coordinator Spencer Danielson gets hired as the interim coach. And then after finishing 8-6, they win the Mountain West. He gets hired as the actual head coach now. What's tough for me looking at them, 8-6 isn't good enough, which is weird to say, right? Because most programs, if you went 8-6 and win your conference, that's a pretty solid year. But Boise State just has those sky high expectations and want to be very, very good every single year. They're the top rated G5 team by S&P Plus. They're the third most likely team to go 11-1 in the G5 at 12%. And they got some interesting players, man. Ashton Jeanty at running back is a dude, right? Do you want to talk about him a little bit?
Yeah. Ashton Jeanty, he's just a star. Like, he's a game-changing player. And they have a couple of those guys that have star power and some new players as well. But Jeanty probably leads the pack there. Malachi Nelson, also the quarterback. I'll talk about a little bit about him when I give my ranking for Boise State. But on offense, they have firepower, man. Now, the question for them, like you said, not only are there a lot of new pieces that we're not sure how they're going to fit together in the Boise State offense or just program as a whole, we have been jolted a little bit by Boise State already just last season, a little bit of an underwhelming season. Now, they turned it around a lot after the late coaching change, but that wasn't what we expected. So for Boise State, there's a lot of hope in this team. Looks like they got a lot of things going in the right direction. It just comes down to, are they actually going to put it together this year? I think they will. I think there's too much talent not to when you're looking at the Mountain West Conference or at G5 in general. But it's another really fun team. A lot of fun teams in G5 this season. It's a lot to be excited about.
Yeah, I mean, watching games on the blue turf is always a good time. It's just, you see it and it's aesthetically just rocks you a lot, but it's awesome.
Yeah.
They play Oregon, which is, again, that's a tough game. And I think what gives me pause is I can just very easily see what happened last year happening this year, where last year Boise State goes and plays Washington pretty early in the season, right? And they get thumped by a team that was very, very good. I mean, Washington in the national championship, right? Oregon, I think, is a similar level of team this year. They're third or fourth in the nation, I would say. Just completely, they're a very, very good team. And so I wonder, you're unproven at quarterback. You don't have a lot of weapons returning outside of Jeanty at running back. Their wide receiver room is not great right now. The defense is in a little bit of flux. It's a first-time head coach, right? All these things, and you go into Oregon, and if you get thumped, does that take the wind out of your sails, right? Like it did last year with Washington. Yeah. I think that's where they worry me a little bit. They have the most talent, I think, in the Mountain West by a decent amount, right? It's them, and then the only close program is Fresno State. But, with that can come some, tough things when you have those high expectations. You go out and you get thumped in game. I think they play Oregon in week 3. It's somewhere pretty early in the season. And if that takes the wind out of your sails, does Fresno come up as a team that can trump them. I think it's something to look out for. It's something that I can very easily see happen.
Yeah, like I said, for Boise State, it doesn't necessarily give you a lot of comfort with the recent history of the program. The Oregon game early also could be concerning. Like when I think of App State, for me, they kind of give me like a little bit of a security blanket feeling, right? Where you're like, okay, I feel like I know what I'm getting out of App State this season. For Boise State, I don't think you have that feeling, but I think you also, at least for me, for Boise State, you have a feeling of, okay, this could be something that is actually really special. This could be a really good team. And we'll see where they end up landing up my board. It's going to be higher than 4. I'll tell you that. But
there you go.
Yeah.
Moving on up the board, as you said, Connor, for me at number 3, that's where I have App State, right? I think I see them as a little higher upside because of Aguilar than you do, but they are replacing their entirety of the interior offensive line. And anytime you have to do that, that is a tough task. But with Aguilar being fairly mobile and able to avoid sacks, I think he minimizes that a little bit. And I think they're going to put it all together. They have their top 4 wide receivers back, right? Led by, we were talking about looking at preseason all-conference lists. This is one I actually found was the Sun Belt. Caden Robinson was first team all Sun Belt at wide receiver, and he's leading, again, the top 4 receivers from last year. So I think just with that offensive potential, that's what, put them up over Boise State for me, especially at that quarterback position.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about App State a lot, but they're a good team. They've got all the pieces. They play in a tough conference, and it's going to be a dogfight throughout that season. I could easily see them, and I think they will be at least in the conversation for the top team in the G5, hopefully playing for that playoff berth. I think we'll definitely be talking about App State around that time. They're a team that, like I said, I think they're a lock to win a fair share of games and have a pretty successful season overall.
Totally agree. And at number 3, who do you have?
For number 3, I've got Memphis. So Memphis, they're returning.
Wow.
I got Memphis number 3. Seth Hennigan coming back for his 4th season as a starting quarterback after his best season last year. They went 10-3, so a good year for Memphis, but I think they're going to get even better. And as a junior, Hennigan was great. 32 touchdowns. One of the big reasons why Memphis currently sits at number 2 in the AAC for returning production. And I think that quarterback's going to power them to a very good season. I think they're a little bit of an underrated team, depending on where you look. Some people have them around that top 3 area. But I think that, again, this is a team that really could make waves around G5. I've got them at number 3.
Yeah, and that's where I'll skip ahead a little bit just to talk about Memphis. I had Memphis as my number 1 team in the G5. I am betting, as you said, on Seth Hennigan coming back, right, and having as good or better of a year. He was a guy I was really surprised didn't transfer. There was a ton of talk. Even the announcers in the bowl game they were playing in were talking about him being talked to by other programs and trying to get pulled away and being tampered with. So to see him stick with Memphis, I was really happy about that. And they have a lot of weapons back. Rock Taylor, Demir Blankmuse, they're both back. And they almost both went over 1,000 yards. I think Taylor did, and then Blankmuse didn't by 20-something yards. I think they both easily could be 1,000-yard receivers this year. They got an underrated portal pickup in Jair Shorter, who was a great guy at North Texas before he transferred to Auburn and didn't have a great year. That Auburn team was weird. And they got Mario Anderson transferred in from South Carolina. They brought in, Elijah Herring. They go from Tennessee. They're bringing in legit good transfers. I think they have the best, or at least top 3 portal class in the G5. And so, when you look at a team that was really, really good last year at 10-3, and then they add just amazing pieces, I'm very excited about this Memphis team. I think they even have the potential to steal a game in the college football playoff.
Wow. Yeah, no, I think they're a really good team. I have my top 3. Everyone in my 3, I could easily see being the top team in G5 by season's end. So my top 3 teams, and we'll hit on them in just a second, I could see any single one of them being the team that goes into the college football playoff. It's kind of hard to say they're 1, 2, 3 for me. I know this is a little bit, I feel like cheating a little bit to say, but it's kind of like 1A, 1B, and 1C. They're
right.
all give you something that you like in a different way. And at this point in the season, there's so much speculation. We don't know a whole lot yet, especially for some of these G5 programs where there's a little bit less media coverage exposure or stuff like that. So Memphis is a great team. I have them at 3. I do think the 2 teams I have ahead of them are a little bit better for me personally, but I'm glad that we have some differences in our list. It gives a more well-rounded look at each team.
Yeah, and totally fair, because I think when you look at the X factor for this Memphis team, and the biggest question mark I have is the O-line. They're only bringing back one O-lineman from last year. And normally that is a huge, that's a huge negative. They brought in 5 O-line transfers, though. And biggest ones would be Jalen Nichols from South Carolina, Trent Holler from Marshall. And so you're counting on these guys to be able to come in through the portal and build your O-line, which we've seen with Colorado and a couple of the teams usually doesn't work out. But I'm taking a bet on it. And, I think if you came to me at the end of the season and said, hey, Memphis didn't win the American, maybe Tulane did or UTSA did or whoever, the first thing that I would point to is say that O-line probably didn't come together like it should have.
Yeah, that is definitely the Achilles heel for them heading into the season, you could say. But I'm looking at their schedule right now, and I mean, the American is a tough conference, so I'm not surprised to see some heavy hitters on this schedule. But they got Florida State in their 3rd game. They got Troy in their 2nd game. We talked a little bit about Troy. We might not be on high as them or as high on them as some other teams, but I mean that's a game that you got to come prepared for. They're going to play USF in the American, of course. So that's a big game on October 11th. That might be one that we talk about when we highlight some games we're looking forward to. That could be a fun one. Some clash of styles there. UTSA, they'll play on November 2nd, another team in the American, and they'll finish up with Tulane. So, the AAC, we talked a lot about the Sun Belt. That's a conference too, where Memphis is going to be kind of battling it out almost every other week with teams that we have in contention for our top 10 in a group of 5. So they're going to have a gauntlet of a schedule that I think they're ready for. And I think you would probably even favor them in a lot of those games that I just mentioned. But they're going to be tested when it comes to college football playoff time if they do get that burn.
I think it gives them a little bit of wiggle room too. I think they can lose a game, and then if they still win the American, like let's say they lose at Tulane and then come back in the American Championship and it is Tulane and they beat them, right? Because they had so many road games and so many tests, I think it gives them that room for error with their strength of schedule. But you're right, man, it doesn't set up great for them in terms of the games that are more in question are all on the road, and that's never what you want. And you need that schedule to line up with your talent window, and it really doesn't for them, right? So that's going to be tough. I know for me, for number 2, we're talking about a team that doesn't have a lot of wiggle room in their schedule, and that's Liberty.
Yep.
When you look at Conference USA, it's probably the worst conference football-wise in the FBS. Not a ton of historically good programs. The CUSA in past years had been very, very good, but a lot of those teams that held it afloat went to the American. When you talk about FAU, especially from the football perspective, UAB, teams that are historically very, very good for the G5 went to another conference. And so it leaves you now with Liberty not being challenged all that much by other teams in their conference. Now, they do have the out-of-conference game against App State, like we talked about, and that's very important. I think if they lose that game, they're not going to be in the conversation to be the G5 playoff spot. They already almost were taken over by SMU last year, with SMU being 2 losses and Liberty being undefeated. They were 1 spot away from, even with all of that going right for them, they still almost didn't get in. So this is a team in Liberty that has to go undefeated, I think, this year. Would you agree with that, Connor?
100%. For them, if they don't go undefeated, they're not going to be in a conversation to be in that top spot in the G5. I do think last year the right decision was made to bring Liberty in to the NY6 game. Yep. Not a good game, but I don't think any team in the G5 would have been able to put up a fight against Oregon, especially when you see how far Washington went at the end of the season, right? In Oregon, they were in a dogfight with Washington in that Pac-12 championship. So that Oregon team was really good. That wasn't like, a Penn State of that season or a team like that where you would think a G5 team might be able to have the game against Oregon. That was never going to happen. But I do think Liberty being the top team last year, as unbiasedly as I can be, was the right choice, just because there wasn't a lot of other teams that I felt like had good resumes. Not even discounting some of the things you hold against Liberty, like playing a really weak schedule in the Conference USA. That's totally valid, and I get that. And that's why I think Liberty needs to go undefeated to be in that conversation again next year. And again, for that App State game, we're going to continue to talk about that throughout the season a lot, I think, especially for a regular season game. But for Liberty, I feel like there's a lot more pressure on that game than there is for App State. Of course, both teams are really going to want that one. It's two of the best teams in G5, but for Liberty, you feel like if we don't win this game, like our season long-term, apart from Conference USA, which, let's be honest, they probably feel like they have locked up. Now you got to win the games, but still, if they don't win that App State game, it's like anything past a conference championship is probably out of the window. For App State, they have some more leeway there just because of the conference they play in.
Yeah.
But for Liberty, I have them at 2 as well. The big thing for them, Caden Salters returning after winning the Conference USA Most Valuable Player. They were in the Conference USA for the first time last season.
Is he the best quarterback coming back in G5, do you think?
Jamie Chadwell. I think he has an argument. I think he's one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in G5. For me, I'd probably have him number 1, but there's some other guys on that short list that I could definitely see having an argument. But I think that he's the top guy in the G5 at the quarterback position. I think Jamie Chadwell is one of the best coaches, one of the top coaches as well.
Yeah.
And Liberty, they run up on offense. They're going to score points, and their defense is very good as well. At least they were last year. That's the question mark for them, I think, coming into this year. Is that defense going to be maybe even a little bit better than they were last season? If you want to have a really good showing against App State and going forward, we're going to continue to talk about it. The biggest thing for Liberty, if they play in the Conference USA, it really hamstrings what this team could be or the reputation they could get, or maybe it helps them. Maybe they're going to be feasting on some of these weaker Conference USA teams, and when they're really tested by your App States, the weaknesses are going to show. That's the question. Liberty, they're bringing back a lot of talent. They've lost some big players as well, but for me, they're the number 2 team I have on my board.
Yeah, again, I just think that Liberty has to go undefeated. They have to do it emphatically in beating that App State team. But I do think they have the team to do it. You talked about Caden Salter in the offense. Hitting on the defense, they lost a ton, especially to the portal in the secondary, right? Guys like Kobe Singleton and Preston Hodge both went to, well, Oregon State's not a P4 program anymore, but, kind of. And then Colorado for Preston Hodge. And this team plays a lot of cover 1. They are going to man you up and ask corners to be on islands. And to do that, obviously, you're going to need a lot of very good secondary players. So that is the one question mark I have, because pretty much everywhere else, they bring back the full D-line, right? And TJ Bush is a year older. Jay Hardy is a year older. And then other than that, I mean, at linebacker, you really just have to replace Green. And other than that, and even then you have Jolly, right? You have Jerome Jolly that can slide that spot, I think. So it's setting up, man. I do think that this team will be really, really good again. I think Coach Jamie Chadwell is just, as you said, outstanding. He's competing, I think, for one of the best coaches in the country, period. Not just in the G5, but I think his scheme and his proven track record of winning puts him with a really good resume. And dude, Liberty just has more resources than a lot of teams in their conference, right? The facilities, the ability to travel the way they want, ability to have even a little bit of NIL, right? Stuff like that is just what levitates them into this spot, even with not being an FBS program for that long.
Yeah, and also those perks help with recruiting a whole lot as well. And we've seen them kind of poach some other G5 talent, like we talked about with the App State quarterback and some other guys like that. That's kind of helps them reload and push up that timetable just a little bit, try to fill in some of those holes that they lost from last season through the transfer portal. CJ Daniels comes to mind, the wide receiver. He's going to be a tough one.
Yeah. That's a good point, because that's another spot where they've got have some question marks, is that wide receiver. Yeah. Oh, we're back. Yeah, I'd say that's kind of the other spot where you have a little bit of questions is, hey, do we have that number 1 dude at receiver? Trayon Sibley is very good, but he didn't have to be that last year. And in the Chadwell offense, part of it, you see all the triple option run stuff, but they need those deep shots to be able to take the pressure off of the run box, right? You got to have somebody who could step up and do that. I think Sibley can. And then they got a couple transfers coming in, one from NC State, one from Purdue. Purdue one especially with his big body. He's 6'5", he's over 200 pounds. Prototypical deep threat. One of those guys I think can step up and, put Liberty back in the conversation for one of the best offenses in the country.
Yeah, I also as good as CJ Daniels is and as helpful as he was to the offense, I don't think you need as talented a wide receiver as CJ Daniels to make this offense work. You'll take it if you can get something close to it, but you just need something that can take the top off the defense just as a threat. Someone who can go out there and run past a corner or a safety and let Caden Salters throwing the ball down the field, or at least threaten it, because they're going to do a lot of creative stuff in the box like you talked about. So CJ Daniels was a phenomenal receiver. He was great for them last season. It's going to be a hole to fill. I think they'll be able to do that and be okay. And I trust Jamie Chadwell and this offensive coordinator group, just the offensive coaching staff as a whole, to be able to scheme stuff up, game plan for teams, and find a way to use the weapons they do have, number one being Caden Salters.
For sure. And so I had Memphis at number one. Who was your number one team for the G5?
Yeah, I had Boise State at number one for me personally. I'm wowed by the talent. We got to see how it comes together on the field, like we talked about for Texas State a little bit. But you got five-star prospect Malachi Nelson entering the scene at quarterback. I got big hopes for him. You got Ginty back in the backfield. He's been a monster for them. You expect him to do the same this season. They've got some other pieces that might not be as eye-grabbing or headline-catching throughout the offense as well that they've added in. The defense, a little bit more of a question mark, but they've added some pieces there. I mean, when I think of G5 football, and I'll be honest, when I'm thinking about college football right now, I'm thinking a lot about the new NCAA game coming out, and also the NCAA games that I played growing up. And for me, when I think of G5 football, I think of Boise State, man. I think of playing on the blue field on the Xbox back in the day. And they kind of lost that glam, I feel like, over the last couple of seasons, where they haven't really seemed like that G5 powerhouse. But I think this is a return to the past. I really do. I think that this is going to be the first season where they kind of put their foot down and make themselves back in the top conversation. And it's a pretty good year to do that in the G5 with the college football playoffs, of course, opening up. And now there being a spot awarded to a G5 team. And for me, Boise State is the leading favorite to take that spot. And I don't think that's really going to change leading up to week one.
Yeah, I think the X factor for them you hit on is Malachi Nelson, right? Can he do what Caden Salter did? Hey, he's a very, very highly rated recruit coming out of high school, goes to a very historic program, Malachi Nelson coming from USC, Salter from Tennessee. And it doesn't work out for whatever reason. Salter, it was some, team dismissal issues that they were pretty vague about. For Nelson, seemed to be, depending on what message board you read, general maturity or just not fulfilling what Lincoln Riley thought he could be. But man, there's talent there, right? He was a 5-star for a reason. And can you bounce down and fulfill on that potential that he so clearly has? That is the X factor for me with them, because they're not bringing back a ton outside of Ginty on offense. I already hit on the wide receiver room not being great. But if you have a quarterback at the level that we think Nelson could be, that elevates your wide receivers a lot, right? And if people have to pay attention to the run game, I can see Boise State getting back to, like you said, their history of having great offenses.
Yeah, looking at their schedule, we kind of already did with the Oregon game. They have them early. That's going to be maybe a little bit of a litmus test of what this team's going to be. Now, against a team like Oregon, it could be kind of hard to judge a program like Boise State.
It's going to be tough, because is that one
there
in
might
Austin
just not
Stadium?
No, that's in Oregon. That's in Eugene. So that's going to be on the road. Makes it a little bit tougher as well. After that, they got Portland State, so you would think they'll be okay there. Washington State after
Bounce
that.
back game.
When you look at some of their other tests, I mean, they're playing in the Mountain West. There's not a whole lot of them. San Diego State could be interesting, probably not. Wyoming, we'll see what they are this year. Oregon State is their last game out of conference. So the Oregon State games could be interesting. The Oregon one especially, maybe it won't be too interesting depending on how the Ducks are rolling. But for Boise State, apart from those games, you would think they have a pretty open schedule, which is good, because I think they're going to need to have some of these newer players like Malachi Nelson coming into the program, and he's followed by a lot of other transfers that we just haven't talked about. They're going to need to get their footing a little bit, I think, in Boise, and have some games where they can kind of gain some confidence first and foremost. And they'll have the opportunity to do that once they get past that Oregon game. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, they certainly have the talent to do so. At skill positions, O-line, defense, bringing in, like you said, some good defensive transfers as well. That, it's just tough to hit on everybody, right? Because there's so many people moving around and so many people on a roster. But trust us, Boise State, brought in one of, if not the best portal class in the G5. They were up there for sure. So that is going to do it for us today on Take 5. Again, I'll give my list of my top 5. So that number 1, Memphis. Number 2, Liberty. Number 3, App State. Number 4, Boise State. And number 5, USF. Connor, you want to give your list real quick?
Yeah, I got Boise State 1, Liberty 2, Memphis 3, App State 4, USF 5.
Yeah, so those are some teams to watch out for. Again, you can go back to the beginning of the episode to check out some of the honorable mentions we have. There's obviously more good teams to watch than just these 5 in the G5. But these are just to start the conversation. We wanted to start with something that was, kind of general, that we'd hit on a lot of the best teams that we think are going to be there coming into the 2024 season. So now we're going to start drilling down into some more specific stuff, giving you some conference breakdowns, specific team breakdowns if we find one to be interesting or more interesting than any of the others. But thanks for tuning into us, and we're going to put some clips out of this on Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, TikTok, and we're just going to try and grow that presence. I know I'm going to try and get this all edited today and get it up on Spotify, and that's where you can check us out. Connor, if you want to give them the name on Spotify.
Yeah, let me just pull it up real quick. I believe it's just Take 5. So if you look up Take 5 on Spotify, hopefully it comes up. I'll try that right now on my own Spotify. But as I'm doing that, if you're a fan of some of these programs that we're talking about, or even one that we did, and you just don't have a lot of media coverage for your school, this is a great place to follow on throughout the season. This isn't going to be a one-time thing. We're going to be doing this all season long. We're going to be talking about sports apart from football as well, although that's going to be the wealth of the conversation, especially during this part of the season. But make sure you tune in and continue to follow us on Spotify. And it's just Take 5 on Spotify. If you look us up there, we'll change some stuff to make it a little bit more visible, get a profile picture up there and stuff like that. But make sure that you tune in, continue to listen to us every week. We'll be putting out episodes for you guys. We're going to be doing some more deep dives on teams, on conferences, more specific stuff leading up to the season. And then once college football starts back up, we're going to be rolling here, covering all things G5.
It's going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Connor, and guys, have a blessed day.